Let's do a little refactoring. So if I look at my archive view and my tag view and my index view, I can see that we're sharing a lot of code between these views and it's looking a little redundant. In fact, if I switch between my archive view and my tag view, we can even visually see that very little changes. If I go to the index view, it's not quite as obvious because I don't have this alert showing the data that's being filtered, but still it's very similar. So I'm going to show you a couple ways that we haven't gone over quite yet to eliminate this redundancy. The first thing we're going to do is use the compose tag to dynamically bind our existing view models to an additional view that contains this common HTML. And if that sounds complex, don't worry, it's going to be quite simple. So the first thing we're going to do is within our posts folder, let's just create a new view. So I'm going to create a new file and save it as post-list.html. And this is going to be our new post list view. I will go into my archive view.html and I'm just going to copy all of this. Go over to the post list HTML, paste it in there. The only difference is in line 9, since this is very archive specific, I am going to take all that out and I'm just going to create a new template literal here that says title. Great. So you can imagine that all of this is relevant to really any of the other types of views. And also to accommodate the fact that my index view doesn't necessarily have this, this filter display, I can just say if a title exists, bind this. Otherwise, we're not going to see this section. Great. So let's go back to our archive view.html. And now that we've included all this information, let's take this out and we're simply going to use the compose tag. So I will say compose, and we are going to compose a view here. And the view that we are going to compose is the post list view that we created. And so what you'll notice is, unlike custom elements, we don't have to explicitly bind anything to this tag, because what we're doing is we are binding the view model associated with the archive view to this post list view. So let's open up the archive view model associated with this view. So we see that we have a post property that is being retrieved from our post service, and we also potentially have an error being returned from our post service. We don't have a title yet, so let's go ahead and create that. We will say this.title, and let's just make it viewing posts by, or viewing posts from, since this is going to be a month, this.archive. Great, so now we have a title, we have posts, and we have error. And as I mentioned, we don't need to explicitly bind it because our compose tag is going to bind our archive view model to this post list view. Cool. So let's open up our browser, assuming that we are watching this. And great, I can click on my archives and everything is still working. So I'm going to take that as a good sign. And now I can go back into my code base and make that change to my other views as well. So I'm going to go into my tag view. And instead of having all this code, I'm just going to take this compose tag and paste it in there. Excellent. And I'm going to open up the tag view model, and once again I'll need to make sure that I set my title. So I'll say this.title equals viewing posts by tag this.tag. So now we have a title, we have the posts, and we have any potential errors. So now I'm going to go back to the browser and click on a tag. Great, so now we're saying viewing posts by tag. We can click around a little bit, make sure that's working. And then the final step is going to be to take this compose tag, go into my index.html, and once again, paste this here. And I will go to my browser and I will click home, and it's listing all our posts again. And as you notice, we didn't supply a title because we're not filtering by anything, so there is no filter being displayed. But if I go to my tags, yeah, there's a filter being displayed there. If I go to an archive, again, still a filter being displayed. So let's go back into our code and take a look at what we've done. We basically took everything redundant between the archive view, the tag view, and the index, and now these look really like very concise views, and we put them into this postlist.html, and we made sure that this could be written such that it was uniform between those different views. So this is great. This was something totally new that we went over, and it's a great thing to know how to do. But we can also, and I think some folks would argue it's more appropriate to do so, actually still use what we've done before, which is a custom element to serve this purpose. So that's what we're going to do now, is we're going to once again refactor this as a custom element. And I will explain why some folks would argue that this is a better method, but I'll do that at the end when it becomes a little more obvious. So what I'm going to do is open up my resources folder and go into the elements folder. And you see we already have this blog post custom element. Well, let's just create a post list custom element. And instead of doing so in my command line, I'm just going to create it just right here, and I am going to copy this HTML over from our previous post list view, and I'm going to save this in my custom elements folder as postlist.html, and I'm just going to delete this previous post list HTML that we had in our posts folder. Great. So I am going to show you this custom element, but it's going to be a little different than we did last time, because what you can actually do when your custom elements are fairly simple and when you don't need to really hook into any of the component lifecycle for that element, you can actually just use an HTML file, and you don't even need to create the view model explicitly for it. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So in our archive view, instead of composing the view, let's just require the custom element. So I'm going to take this out and do a require. And this is going to require from resources, elements, post list. But I have to say postlist.html because we don't have the view model as well. So we're just talking about the HTML. Great. So now I can use that post list element. Unlike with the compose tag, I actually have to bind to this custom element. So let's just make sure we bind everything up here. So we can do error bind. And again, that's going to be the error property of our view model. We can do title bind. That's going to be the title property of our view model. And we can also do posts bind, and that'll be the posts array in our view model. Awesome. So I know, let me just go back to our post list custom element here, and we actually have to fix this require here because now it's actually in the same directory. So we'll require from blog posts there. Great. So we have this all set up, and now I can paste this into our tag view and our index view. Great. Except our index view will not have this title. And one more thing we need to do is we need to go back to our post list element. And you might be wondering, well, we don't have our view model. How can we tell this what it's accepting as bindable from the parent component? Well, all we really have to do is within this template tag, we can say bindable, and then we just list the items that are bindable. So once again, it's error and title and also posts. Okay, awesome. So once again, this feels very similar to the compose tag, except the main difference is our custom element. We have to specify the things that are bindable. But otherwise, yeah, it's feeling pretty similar. So let's just make sure that this looks good between our archive view, our tag view, and our index view. Great. Let's go back to our browser and give it a little refresh. Okay, so we're already seeing the index view and it looks pretty good to me. And if I go to my tag views, let me go to one of these tags, let's say Aurelia. Well, we're still viewing posts by tag Aurelia, and we see our first post here. We can click on the August archive, and yeah, we're still seeing exactly what we'd want to see here. So it looks like it's working pretty well. And if I go back to my code, I can explain to you a little bit of why some folks would recommend custom elements in this case versus the compose tag. Custom elements, first off, seem just a little more intuitive to say, for example, this is a post list versus, saying something like compose from post, that's just, it's a little bit more verbose, not quite as obvious as, what we're doing here. Additionally, with the custom element, you have to explicitly bind certain things to it, which is actually a really good thing, because with our compose tag, we just kind of give whatever view that we're composing here full access to the view model of this component. And that's not great from an encapsulation perspective, and it can potentially open you up to some errors. So I think the guidance generally is, whenever possible, use a custom element, but if you find a good use case for the compose tag, there's certainly no problem there. So again, Aurelia gives you a lot of great ways to do many things, and you get a lot of choices, which is, I think, a really cool thing. Aurelia is not super opinionated about really anything, and that just offers a lot of flexibility. So I'm going to show you just at least one more really pretty cool thing here, is that with our custom elements, we can use something called the slot API, which I'm going to use. So instead of explicitly binding the title here in our post list property, I'm going to take that out. And instead, I'm going to actually specify what I want the title to be inside of this, inside of the post list element. So let's go back to the archive view model, and we can just take this title out here. I'm going to take this out completely and go back over to my archive view, and we're going to say viewing posts from archive. Great. So then if I go back to my custom element, so I'm going to get rid of this title here and say that I'm going to put a slot here. And again, I need to take out this if bind. And so any information that comes from, that's put within the post list tag inside the opening and closing tag here is going to populate into the slot within the custom element. So anything is going to populate in there. So let's go back to our browser and check it out. So yeah, it still says viewing posts from December 2017. So you might be wondering what we actually gained by doing that. And what we gained is that I can now go back to my archive view HTML And well, what can actually go within this tag? Well, it can be whatever you want, really. So I can start saying, well, I want maybe to bold the archive. So now we see, oh, this is actually giving me quite a bit of power. I can use HTML. I can do all sorts of stuff within this slot, and it's just going to populate into my custom element. So that's going to be something that can potentially be really handy. So that's what we're going to use this time around, because maybe we do want some formatting. So in the same way, we can go back to our post. In the same way, we can go back to our tag view HTML, and let's just paste this in here. And so we are going to say viewing post by tag, and again we can say strong and tag here. And let's go back to the tag view model and just remove the title because we're no longer using that. And then finally, we are going to want to go back to our index.html, and we can specify something in here as well. So we can just say viewing all posts. Great, so let's go back to our browser. Let's click on Aurelia. So yeah, viewing posts by tag Aurelia, or we go home and say viewing all posts. So if we go back to our code now, we're looking at something pretty powerful. We can do these custom elements. We can bind, an error to that element. We can bind our posts, and we can pass some information via these slots using HTML. Really powerful stuff. And more importantly, we're now really eliminating some redundant code in our code base. We've learned a couple different ways to do that. Again, Aurelia gives you a lot of options, which is really great. So thanks for working through this with me. I hope you've learned a little bit about eliminating redundant view code here, and I'll talk to you next time.